Winds of Numa Sera is a high fantasy graphic novel, and we're going to take a look at it. I'm going to try not to reflect it too much at you while we're doing that. That's right, we're not in superhero land today, but in the realm of empires, cat people, and political intrigue. Full disclosure, I was sent this, not in a sponsored capacity, but in a we'd love for you to take a look at it capacity, talk about it if you want to, and if you like it or don't like it, either way, which is a bold claim. I was intrigued by it, largely by the cover art at first, and upon giving it a read, I did decide that I did have a lot to say about it, both positive and negative. Don't say even if you don't like parts of it if you don't mean it. A lot of you are always wondering what else is going on in the graphic novel space. What else is out there to read? So I wanted to make you aware of this, then you could decide whether it's up your alley or not. See, this is why I so rarely hold the books that I have when I'm doing these videos, because I'm just so aggressive about gesturing with them. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics. Let's take a look at Winds of Numa Sera. I keep wanting to add a determiner in there. The one time I want to say the, and it's not there. Let's put you up there. Now it can sit safely without me throwing it everywhere. This graphic novel is 224 pages with the story ending on 218. It's published by Dark Horse and retails for $24.99 USD. It's written by Morgan Rosenblum and Johnny Handler and has several artists: Edward Petrovich, Eduardo Mello, Alessio Moroni, and Felipe Andrade. Colors by Valentina Taddeo. There are art shifts, one quite drastic, though there is an attempt to organize how they happen in a logical manner, which we will get to. I'm going to break this one down into sections, and it's going to be mostly spoiler free, though of course some details discussed will give inklings to certain plot elements. So if after the plot section you're interested and don't want to know anymore, that's the time to dip. Or even before if you want to know absolutely nothing. Even knowing it exists is almost a spoiler. So firstly, when I got this, it came with a series Bible with, ooh, reflective. I did not read this on my first read through because I wanted to have the most authentic experience to what an average customer would have, which is just probably picking it up and going from there. Most people wouldn't seek out a series Bible unless they got really invested in the lore characters anyway. Plus, the main work should make sense, be able to stand on its own, and invite excitement and investment without supplementary material. So with all that said, let's get to it. Our story takes place in the world of Ethera, which over centuries has seen the rise of the Numa Seran Empire. Reaching its zenith, it has nearly conquered all under its Emperor Prothus. However, in the process, he's beginning to near a realm that is too large for him to control. Think of Roman expansion, basically. We're building up to the collapse, it's too big. Morale is down in the main capital, the outer areas are getting harder to patrol, but Prothus is good at brokering these deals and promises that manage to keep people going. So he pushes forward against the advice of his High Council, resulting in them needing to take matters into their own hands. 5 years later, the Emperor is dead and his daughter Lilia, now the child Empress, ascends. The council hope their machinations will result in a pliable ruler. While across the land and outside as well as inside the realms they control, things, dare I say, the winds are changing. As Lilia sets out to tour her realm in search of a suitor as well as to see her empire for herself against her council's wishes in that last part, we are introduced to some key members from different areas who are being placed in positions to potentially change the structure of the empire. Okay, that's the spoiler-free plot overview. Now let's start breaking this down. One of the key elements of setting up a big fantasy story is establishing the realm and the rules therein. Fantasy tends to work best when the lore is clear. You need things to be happening in a way that the reader can ascertain who is from where. What are the rules and customs of that location? And how is all of that going to alter how the characters interact? All of these things are going to build on top of each other. Winds of Numa Sera handle some aspects of this better than others. The empire is vast, so there are many kingdoms and provinces. When it comes to the main ones that are introduced, they all have distinct visual cues, such as the architecture and costuming and just overall tone. The way they are rendered helps keep them feeling distinct. So most of the time, visually, just by looking at, say, the sky or a building, you can tell where you are. So when you begin to hop back and forth, it doesn't become a question of which kingdom is this? Where are we? Who are these people? They also draw a distinction between the capital and the various provinces, in that the capital is more diverse, much like an urban city, but the more you get into the individual kingdoms and areas, for the most part, the people become more monolithic, which does several things. For one thing, again, it helps ground the reader, as you know who to expect in each area, and then you can tell if somebody is an outsider or not. And the customs of the people are also unique from one another. And for some peoples, you get to see examples of that, rituals and ceremonies, and they feel as though they belong to those groups, and again, aid in making the world feel more vast. However, that being said, there's a lot left on the surface, as there are so many places to look at. Some just get a bit of a brief, here's this castle, here's this person, and we're moving on. So while there are some areas that get very defined, there is still much left for the reader to fill in. Some of that is just the natural gaps that are left for a reader, because one doesn't have to have a work lay absolutely everything out, but some of the things may feel as if they are missing. There are some key world elements that are hinted at, but could use more of the aforementioned definition, as they factor in quite heavily in terms of how the world runs, such as the religion of Numa Sera, or the exact function of each member of the council and how they were chosen. A definition definition of exactly what the overall rules of the Empire are, as it is a plot point that affects several kingdoms. They have had to change their ways to conform to the rule of the Empire. What we hear about are the things that some of the kingdoms can no longer do. But then some kingdoms are allowed to do things that don't seem to be allowed in the main Numa Sera capital, so it varies. Without knowing everything, it can be a bit difficult to predict future conflicts. You can tell the High Council has been slowly over the years altering the religious texts to favor themselves, but it's not entirely clear what the base religion is except the broad strokes. You have enough to get by, but not enough to go deep. There are some events that unfold later that it's not quite clear are linked to some of the passages in the religion. It's an interesting world and one that has the potential to get invested in, even if it does also have some influences, some more obvious than others. But before we discuss that, we need to talk about the players. If Winds of Numa Sera has many locations, it has even more characters. It's a very rich tapestry, actually. It's very ensemble, though there are a few characters who rise up as focal points. One in particular. For the main focal points we have Lilia, the child empress Numa Sera, who has recently ascended and is very keen to assert herself as empress. We have Calyssandra, daughter of the once king of Denevale, now chafing under the laws imposed by the new regime. She's the one we see the most of. We have Shursa of the Siende, a warrior tribe outside of the Empire, who is threatening their southwest provinces. He does not have much interest in a life of raids and battle despite being the son of the champion. There are some people who will probably matter more as time goes on, so it's important that they're there, but they don't do quite as much in this first graphic novel. We have Krill, a childhood friend of the Empress and the squire forced to flee after discovering too much about the inner workings of the council. We have Drummer of the enslaved Maranim, aka the cat people, who finds himself free and yet in service of the Empress whom he had pledged to kill. And we have Idgar the Seventh, Calysandra's brother, equally displaced by the changes to their kingdom and bearing a fierce resentment for how it has altered him and his sister's roles. There is a tagline about how the characters must make their own fate, and these characters are the ones working most directly towards that, and with the most ties to other, ensuring some of the more interesting clashes when they do meet, and some already have. These are just a few. There are also other lords, other siblings, the council, and while it's all interesting, there are some nice details, and no one is fiercely unlikable, and they do all have distinct personalities, there's too many to get a firm grasp on them. But you do know enough to know they would react differently in different situations, and have enough on the focus to be able to predict some of those reactions. Some like Krill, who upon fleeing Numa Sera finds himself as squire to Calyssandra, end up fading into the background. Others are briefly introduced and are clearly meant to play a bigger role later. As a result, the plot lines surrounding the characters do a lot of the heavy lifting. This in terms of accenting and bolstering the existing character personalities, or hindering them. And that is also going to come down to how one responds to the tropes in play, and just the types of characters one enjoys. So it's very much going to be a mileage may vary kind of thing. Some may love certain characters who others hate, and vice versa. On the whole, while most characters play with some established tropes, they steer clear of being just straight up archetypes. You can recognize some of their core elements, but it's worked into events happening in the environment. One solid example is the relationship between Idgar and Calyssandra. Idgar is very much the resentful brother and spurned son. However, the way they do this is by subverting the trope that Calyssandra is occupying. She is by far the most archetypal in terms of modern tropes at play. Calyssandra wants to be a knight, like many a female character for decades. It's not fighting against the grain if everybody does it, Calyssandra. The change here, and for the better, is that she's not bucking against societal norms to do this. This was something that was allowed inside of their province and her kingdom. However, under the new empire, it's forbidden, and now their province has been forced to restructure. This puts a bit of a twist on the trope while maintaining the core struggle. This means now her brother, who was not favored by her father, has to take over those warrior duties she once aspired to, while she must take over the political duties that he wanted. This has led to a wedge, not only between the various family members, but also Denevale and Numa Sera, as there is a sense that they have sold away their children's futures. Shursa, as the intellectual son of a lead barbarian, is aided by the fact that he speaks little and isn't arrogant. So he becomes more of a vessel to observe his people through, and not necessarily a judgmental one. So it's left up to you how you feel about them. Through him you learn things like that their land is dying, and perhaps it would be best to migrate rather than rely on ever-dwindling resources coming from the raids that they regularly conduct, but also that the bonds of tradition are strong. Lilia fares the best for doing different things in terms of the more recognizable modern fantasy trends, which will either really land with some or alienate her to others. She is a child, so she is at times naive, but that works well with how sheltered she is meant to have been. She is also proud to be the empress, and while she is fearful of certain duties like childbearing suffering because her mother died giving birth to her, she doesn't fall into some of those more played out modern tropes, such as the "I must marry for love" or "ew, marriage at all." Instead, she accepts her duty and seeks to fulfill it, a manifestation of her breeding and training since birth, and helps establish more of the otherness and other timeliness that many fantasy series seek to emulate, creating worlds that, while recognizable in terms of character motivations or perhaps the way that certain things are unfolding, even if the events are different, allow the reader to separate from one's own actual reality while still providing intriguing concepts or conflicts that can resonate. Though some prefer to see the world with which they are more familiar reflected, regardless of genre. Sometimes leading too much into modern tropes create immersion-breaking moments. In fantasy, this also happens surrounding language, where the people sound a bit too colloquial, where suddenly the character is speaking in a way that feels much more relatable to the current era outside of the work, rather than how one would imagine they would speak in a different kingdom in another time. That does not happen too much in Winds of Numa Sera. There are a couple of scenes where people veer towards sounding like they're having a conversation in a regular pub, but for the most part it remains consistent to the way the characters are introduced in that world, so it maintains the world's own speech patterns. As for playing with certain themes, there's a very interesting moment for Lilila at the end, in that while she makes a decision that many would approve of, in terms of how it affects the world, it is viewed very much as a mistake, for in that sense, in many ways, it could be. It's played into the narrative as something that demonstrates her naivete, and also that the situations she's dealing with are complex. Lilila and Cassandra are in ways meant to parallel each other. Cassandra is also impulsive, but she's also presented in a manner that could come very close to making some view her as a self-insert. Many of her traits that are flaws, for they are meant to be flaws. She even gets called out on them by Krill later on in the book, highlighting the fact that they are meant to be viewed as negative. However, the scenarios in which these traits are presented often still paint her in a favorable light, so still in the right in terms of reaction even if her decision is wrong, which can at times make her flaws not feel like flaws at all. Miles may vary. For me, it made her the most frustrating character. But as one can see from all of this discussion, the depth from the characters comes from their entwinement and interaction with the environment, and the ways that the overall plots are interconnecting with each other. And that element is very strong. And there's a lot to mine there and some interesting directions you can take it in. There are all these little connections being forged between people, such as one of Lilila's older potential suitors being a key player in the subjugation of Moran, and having had an altercation with Jorma. Idgar finding himself in a surprise situation with Shursa, though they have never spoken. They were characters who by the end I was keen to learn more about them. Though I am concerned if the later parts mean to introduce even more, there's still so much to explore with all of these people. Give me more time with the mains. There are moments when reading Winds of Numa Sera when you can feel the influence of other works, such as Game of Thrones, The Mandalorian, Lord of the Rings. Some were more on the surface, and they were just tropes that come to be more heavily associated with certain works, though they are more general fantasy tropes. But others were very on the nose. Miles will vary on how that lands for you, and whether you feel that they work in terms of the narrative and whether they're elevating it or not. The permafrost that the Sea on Deimos crossed for their raids had strong up in the North Wall vibes, but it was played more like the Bering Strait. It was also melting, so it provided some tension for the plot in that way. The fact that that group didn't take their helms off, though, was very Mandalorian. So again, your experience is going to vary, and also how familiar you are with these tropes or with the things being referenced is going to make a difference, because some are going to recognize them and some aren't. The authors don't shy away from talking about that aspect, though. They're fine to discuss what has inspired them. Again, it's just a question of how it's going to land for you and how it's going to impact your overall experience. As mentioned, there's a lot going on here. So how is the pace? How does it feel to read through all of this? It starts more evenly than it ends. At the start, while we are introduced to many people and locations, it feels balanced, as if everything is moving in tandem with each other. But as it goes on and characters start traveling, some parts begin to feel rushed, and some events it becomes harder to gauge how long things are taking, how long people have been traveling, how long they've been in a certain place, etc. So the ending ends up feeling rushed in some sections, but drawn out in others. I feel like it's very apt that this section was the shortest out of all of them. Overall, for me, this was a very aesthetically pleasing book, and each character and setting was distinct. The big art shift occurs in chapter 6. This is a flashback to Moran and its conquest. It's a logical choice to have the flashback be in a different art style, as it can be read as helping distinguish this as a different time. However, this is also a radically different art style from the first part of the book, which, while I personally didn't mind, it took a while to adapt. I used it as a natural break when reading, to just take a break and then come back to it. I can see some people rolling with it, or it just being too jarring for some, like, whoa, what happened? After that chapter, we phase back to more familiar styles. So on the whole, it feels cohesive, but that chapter does stick out, and it does take a bit of a, oh, because it's a flashback and that's why. So you will likely note the differences. Overall, this work is a solid read. The characters are pleasant if a bit familiar. The world has a lot of nooks and crannies that will be very interesting to explore. It's got a lot of potential, a lot of different ways that you can see the different characters interacting with it that could be very interesting. For me, it was a world I found myself wanting to know more about. And by the end, I wish the main work had been longer because I wanted to spend more time there and with the characters. After the first reading and after a day of process was when I went through the series Bible. And it does provide a lot more information. It also starts off stating some of the influences. This does provide some of the answers to some of the questions I had while reading. So while the graphic novel can stand on its own, it is stronger when paired with the series Bible. Some of the things in here would have greatly helped enhance the world building were they in the graphic novel itself, or if they were, if more emphasis had been placed upon them. There probably wasn't enough space to get into some of it without falling into exposition hell, which is a shame because some of those things that are highlighted in here are some of the more unique aspects that are at play. Because of the type of series this is, I can see future installments really fleshing some things out and perhaps retroactively building upon this, something that gets stronger the longer it goes. It's also a work that lends itself to expanded lore. I know it has a card game. It's the kind of thing where one can easily imagine different scenarios for the characters, as mentioned. It had ups, it had downs. Overall, I found it enjoyable. But those are just my thoughts and opinions, and I want to hear yours. Hit that very hard. I want to. I really do. Have you read this? If so, please come. Let's chat down below. Sharing is caring. If not, did this get you interested? Is this something you'd want to check out? Or is this something you now firmly have on your not to read list? Is fantasy a genre you enjoy? Tell me things down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking this time out of your day to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it. I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.